most countries and most people around the world have some word for vibes, right? And it's not just contemporary in terms of the year 2025, but it goes back, decades, centuries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And so it's interesting, though, to figure out most people do have some experience of this thing we call the vibe. They may use different words, they may have different paradigms, but we're saying similar kinds of things, right? And I think that's enlightening, though, because it's not just a throwaway term. It's not just a pop phrase, right? Um, it may be a term we use on a daily basis, not thinking much about it, but there's more there if you scratch the surface, right? And so I guess one of the things I'm trying to do with my work is to help people articulate their experience of vibes and help them articulate their ideas and thoughts about vibes.
Jason Gandio, you are very welcome to the Inner Entrepreneur podcast.
How are you, Paul? How are you doing today?
I'm I'm doing very well. How are you?
Good. I'm doing very well myself.
And you're speaking to me from Philadelphia, and we're just sharing that my only time in Philadelphia was last Wednesday evening when I spent 5 hours waiting in the airport.
I've been to the Philly airport several times. Not a horrible airport. I mean, could be better, but it's not bad. So
It's nice. It's nice enough. Jason, I've asked you on the podcast to speak about vibes, and before my listeners hang up thinking this is going to be a woo-woo conversation, and thinking I found some guy who lives in his mother's basement playing video games all day, I want you. I really would like you. I would really, before even we get into the vibes, I would like you to tell the audience who you are, what you do, because when I researched you, you're a serious individual, an intelligent individual who knows exactly what he's talking about. It's probably a long time since you were in your mother's basement. So
it's been a while. Yeah, it's been a long time.
it's been a while. So I would be, before they dismiss any conversation on vibes, I would just introduce, let us know who you are, please.
Sure. So once again, thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate it. My name is Jason Gandio. I'm a college professor at Temple University in Philadelphia. At Temple, my expertise is the theory and practice of social justice with a focus on activism and social movements. So at Temple, I essentially study and teach about how human beings create social change. However, outside of Temple, my other expertise is the study of vibes. Now, I know that sounds strange to some people. What is a vibe? How do you study this? Are you some crazy hippie? All these kinds of things. But actually, I've been studying vibes for approximately 30 years, going back to my late teens and early 20s. I then went to graduate school and earned my master's degree, my PhD. Um, I used both my thesis and my doctoral dissertation to develop my own philosophy of the vibe, referred to as bodily emanation. In other words, the body emanates or radiates an actual tangible feeling that we can detect on different levels of experience: interpersonal experience, small and large group experience, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then I've worked on different products over the years, over the decades. But one of my big passions in life is to understand this thing we call the vibe. What is it? How do we explain it? How do we define it? Do different cultures talk about the same kind of thing? If so, what kind of words do they use, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, in a nutshell, it's very briefly my background in terms of my expertise and my study of vibes.
So before we get into the vibes, how does how does the study of vibes link to your core expertise and study? I mean, are they connected in some way?
Sure. So I got my graduate degrees in communication studies. Right. So I essentially study how human beings interact with each other, and so I approach the study of the vibe through that
Yeah.
lens.
So that makes a whole lot of sense. If you're studying community and social studies and how we interact,
Right.
vibes is an essential. I would think vibes seems to me. I hadn't picked up that connection before. Obviously, I'd read your bio, but as you explain, I'm going, well, that makes sense in a general sphere of interest in relation to how we connect or how we communicate. And it's interesting. I was explaining to you earlier some of the process I have for taking guests onto the show, and one of those things is I always want to see them on YouTube and listen to them. So, if I see something and I go, that guy sounds interesting, I want to find you on YouTube. I want to listen to you. And I suppose what I pick up is something from you. I don't know if that's a vibe or not, but I will go, I will go, does he sound interesting? Does he sound um, knowledgeable? But also, I will go, do I feel there could be some sort of connection between, can we have an interesting conversation?
Sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
is that a vibe?
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. That's great segue, right?
Yeah.
So obviously you are the host of a podcast, and I would assume that when you do your interviews with your interviewees, you try to find a certain kind of connection. You try to connect with them.
Precisely.
Likewise, I would assume you're trying to connect also with your listeners, the people that aren't
Yes,
on the show but listening or watching on YouTube, right? And so I'd say yes, all of that is part of a vibe. I mean, there's more going on than just vibes. I don't want to totalize everything, right?
of course.
But I come from it from a certain perspective where there's always some kind of feeling relative to human experience, and there's always some kind of vibe, whether that's a conscious experience or a subconscious experience. That depends on the person, the situation, the context, etc. But there's always some kind of vibe happening, and then we have the ability to elevate that experience and that vibe to a conscious way of life. So as you're conducting your interviews, how might you give off a certain kind of vibe in a certain kind of way for a certain kind of reason that then might invite your listeners, invite your interviewee to be more receptive, more interactive, let their guard down, etc. All right, so it's all about the vibe exchange between individuals.
But it's also the vibe exchange between us, I suppose, because if I check someone out in advance of inviting them and I don't feel there's a connection, there's no possibility of us then having an interesting conversation
Yeah,
if there's
yeah.
some sort of connection. Now, I have never considered that to be a vibe before, but as I've described it to several people and to friends, how because I get asked, I have a couple of invites to consider at the moment. I get asked from people who contact me on LinkedIn or whatever, go, hey, can I come? And often people recommend them to me, and they will give me the ABC, the oh, he, she's this, done this. And I find it hard to explain to them that that's just not, I need to find something else. So I'm with you from the point of view, it's not totally, I don't listen to you and go totally, hey, what's the vibe? I need to
Right.
go, well, is he intelligent? Is he articulate? And all of these things.
Mhm.
But all of those things actually won't get it over the line for me. It's what is the connection. Now, I think partly that is I'm going to say security blanket for me, but I consider myself an introvert. So if you came into my social group and you could go, Paul, you've quite a good social life for an introvert, and I go, well, I have an extroverted wife who's I've delegated that to her, who's incredible social and connection talent, which I tend not to have. And so then when I get on, I have to speak to someone for an hour. It's really important to me that there's some vibe there,
Mhm.
because if there's not, I'll struggle to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah. So you used the word connection several times just then in the past couple of minutes, right? And I'm the same kind of way in terms of who I am as a person. Do I feel connected to this person? Do I feel disconnected to this person? Can I kind of jive with this person during conversation? Like, and
Mm.
I'm not saying that during podcasts. I'm saying in everyday life, going to the
Yeah, of
grocery
course.
store, going to the bar, whatever the case may be.
Mm.
Right. Um, and then I think a lot of people do look for that kind of connection, and they may or may not use the word vibe to describe that.
Mm.
Right. But to take this as a learning opportunity, for instance, I would invite your listeners over the next week or so to take inventory of how often they either use the word vibe or they hear someone use the word vibe or some variation. So vibes in the plural, vibration, energy, frequency, mood, atmosphere, all of these things. And I almost guarantee that your listeners will be surprised how often they come across that word. It could be in conversation with friends face to face, could be on a text thread with friends, could be on social media, could be in a song, could be in the news. But you'll hear this word quite often. And then for me, being an intellectual, a professor, my question is always, well, how are people using the word? And then are they explaining it? Are they defining it, right? Is it a throwaway term that people don't think about? Is it a metaphor for emotion? What exactly is this thing that we call the vibe, right? And that's kind of what has driven my interest and career for 30 years at this point.
And what's really interesting, I was thinking about this morning before the podcast. I was thinking, I certainly, and I think most people we use the term vibes all the time. So entirely, if the listeners spend the next week, they're going to find that it's a word they use very, very frequently. But I would often, and a lot of my listeners are business owners, entrepreneurs. I think they tend to be people hugely in touch with their vibes. They, that it could be an idea, it could be they walk into a business opportunity and they get some sort of a sense. So I think we will use vibes all the time. It's very common for me to say, I got a bad vibe off that guy, I got a good vibe. And what I suppose what intrigued me this morning was, so I've used that word all my life. Everyone has. but you somehow it struck you. Well, is it? It's so. I think it's actually so commonplace to us
Yeah.
that no one has ever taught what is it. So maybe we should get back to that basic. How do you define a vibe? I'm sorry. When we say vibe, do we mean vibration, or is that different things?
Okay. This can get complicated real quick, so I'll give you the basic stuff first. Right? All right. So the most basic definition I can think of in terms of a vibe is the exchange of energy between you and other people. So again, the exchange of energy between you and other people. Now, the first intellectual question becomes, what is the nature of this energy? So, for instance, is a vibe a physical phenomenon or a metaphysical phenomenon? Is it a material phenomenon or an immaterial phenomenon? Is it a scientific phenomenon or a spiritual phenomenon? Or perhaps it's all these things at the same time, or perhaps something else all completely different. And I pose this as a question, and I mean this sincerely, because I want your listeners to think about it for themselves.
Mm,
Right. Although I've been studying this for at this point 30 years of my life, right? I don't want to act like I know everything there is to know about this. It's an endless search for what we're talking about, right?
mm,
And so I'm open to different interpretations, different paradigms, etc. And I do really want your listeners to think about when they use the word, what do they mean? Now, to pause there for a moment, I'll give you some concrete examples here of what we mean by vibe, right? So imagine that you go on a first date, right? And one of the ways we evaluate that first date is through a connection between yourself and the other person, like you said before, connections, right? But a lot of time that connection gets translated into the word vibe. So it might be a romantic vibe, a platonic vibe, a sexy vibe, a weird vibe, a bad vibe, a crazy vibe, whatever it is, right? Another example, think about going to a live musical concert. You're there with thousands of other people. We're all there for the same reason. We're all there to have a good time. And at some point during the concert, our bodies start to sync up and fall in rhythm with each other. And you can feel that experience. You feel that vibe of the concert. Likewise, think about going to a sporting event. You're there with 30, 40, 50,000 other people. Everyone's screaming, yelling. All of a sudden, your team wins. Everyone's high fiving. And you can feel the electricity in that stadium. And it's one of the reasons why we go to sporting events, or that live experience as opposed to watching on TV. Now, on the flip side, though, despite what people say, there are also bad vibes and negative vibes, right? It's not just good vibes. So imagine you're at work. It's just a bad work environment. Everyone's in a bad mood. The boss is impossible to talk to. And you can literally cut the tension with a knife. That's a physical
mm,
experience you have in that work meeting. Likewise, you have a really bad argument with your best friend, your spouse, a family member, and for a few hours, a few days, maybe in a few weeks, the vibe is off between you and the other person. Right? These are all basic examples of when we experience a vibe and when we tend to use the word vibe or energy or frequency or something along those lines.
So, which of those things do you think it actually is? Because you've just given us but all the things it could be. But one thing I remember when listening to you is that I'm not a rugby fan,
Okay.
but we have an exceptional rugby team in Ireland. So to be a man of my age and openly admit you're not a rugby fan, um, particularly this weekend because we have a very big game tomorrow, which my wife will watch and I probably won't. So I'm not a big rugby fan. And a number of years ago, Ireland were playing South Africa. So I have two very strong teams, a very, very big game. I don't go to those matches, but we were taking some customers. I'm CEO of a business, so it was like I had to go along. And it was kind of for the people we're inviting, it was a great opportunity to see such a two great teams playing each other. Obviously, I was supporting Ireland, but for me, it was kind of, oh, I got to do this today. But I remember standing on watching this match. I think there were about 80,000 people. I don't know how many of those were Irish, but a lot of them. And we all, me included, wanted our
Yeah.
team to win. And the energy in that stadium was absolutely magnetic. And I remember thinking to me, so prior to that, I'm going, like, what's the attraction? And I got it standing there. I didn't get it watching TV, by the way, but I
Mm-hmm.
got it standing there. Um, and I experienced something similar this year. I took my sons to see ACDC,
Awesome.
and I love it. And again, I remember when Angus Young came on the stage, the guitarist. I don't know if you know, but as he came on the stage and he hit his first chord, I lit up. And the
Mhm.
excitement almost, and I looked over to my son, and I could see the same thing. So my question to you: so I have felt that. The question is, what is it? Is it something tangible? Is it something real?
Good. These are all good questions.
I get the impression after 30 years you haven't answered them.
So again, I'll preface it with this: that I sincerely invite your listeners to think for themselves about what they think this thing is. Right.
Yeah,
Now, for myself, just putting my own cards on the table, right? I said earlier that I developed my own philosophy years ago called bodily emanation.
yeah.
And so I do think the vibe is a real phenomenon. It's an embodied phenomenon, so I call it bodily emanation. Also, when I phrase that as bodily emanation, it grounds our understanding of the vibe. So rather than something very esoteric and abstract, it's like it's just all vibes, it's all vibes. Well, no, actually, it's something that we experience in our bodies, right? I've never experienced another human being that didn't have some kind of vibe. And every time I experience the vibe, it's through my body, hence bodily emanation.
Mm,
Right. And so imagine that your body is radiating or emanating a certain kind of energy out into the world. Right.
mm,
And so my body is doing this, your body is doing that, but everybody across the entire planet is doing this. Right. So we can detect this phenomenon of bodily emanation, this vibe, on the level of interpersonal communication, on the level of small and large groups. Then we can talk about regional vibes. So, for instance, compare the vibe of London to that of New York City,
mm,
right? Or of America to Ireland, right? And there's also one of the reasons why we like to travel, at least why I like to travel, right? When you travel, you encounter different people, different cultures, and each society, each culture gives off its own kind of vibe, right? Then from there, though, we can even go more abstract here, but I would argue that there's also a global vibe. So if each and every body gives off a vibe and there are bodies all across the planet, therefore there must be a global vibe. Then if you want to spend time on this, right, you can learn to use that global vibe as an existential guide that will push you and pull you to certain people, certain experiences, certain events, etc. Now, having said this, I don't want to be totalizing. There's more to human life and more to the earth than just vibes. So all kinds of things are happening, right? But I do think, though, that this phenomenon of the vibe is worthy of intellectual investigation and worthy of intellectual discussion, which is what my job is. Now, I said a lot there. I went off of my professor mode, but so
So you said the vibe is something that we emanate.
yep.
So I stand in the stadium. It's 4 years since I've seen ACDC live. I'm thinking these guys are in their 70s. I may never see may never see them again. They rock the place. They really do. And they come on the stage. So is it just my excitement in the moment? It makes sense that if it is my excitement in the moment, and he struck the first chord, and I'm going to say it was almost electric. I could literally feel that, oh, the buzz is sitting there. So just to kind of pull apart what you might be saying, so I it makes sense to me that that vibration wherever in my body is real because I'm feeling it. Is it a reaction to my emotions or whatever? But it's real. It makes sense for all the people there in their ACDC t-shirts and all this sort of stuff that it is a moment of excitement. Am I experiencing? So are we all then radiating, emanating this vibe? And when when I stand, so if I was standing, I'm just also picturing if I was standing in that arena on my own with ACDC playing, it wouldn't be this. It
That
would
would not.
not be anywhere like it. But I was watching this sea of people, and it's incredible. Is that because I'm experiencing all these people's vibes? So I'm radiating it, but I'm both radiating, I'm generating and receiving. Is that?
Yeah, 100% yes, right? So let's parse out some things you said there, right? So first, in terms of excitement, so I think of excitement in terms of emotion, and there is a reciprocal relationship between emotions and vibes, but not exactly the same thing, right? So an emotion is a psychological response to a state of affairs, right? And
Yeah.
so you're going to this concert, you're excited to see this band, you're there with your son, so that's an emotional response,
Mm,
right? And then as they come on, though, you even get more excited, and the whole crowd's getting
mm,
excited, and the tension's building, right? But on the other side, it's not just emotion; it's also the thing we call the vibe or bodily emanation, right? And you are correct in the sense that if you were there just with the band by yourself, that itself would be a vibe, would be a very different vibe than 20 or 30,000 other people. I don't know how
mm,
big the concert was, but you get the point, right? And so as you collect more bodies, the intensity of the vibe thickens because there's more people and hence more vibes, right? And then also as the bodies get closer, you feel the vibes more. So proximity of bodies has a correlation to the experience of the vibe. So more bodies in closer proximity will produce an intenser vibe as opposed to fewer bodies that are spread out across space. Right. Now, also with a musical concert, though, so all sound is itself a physical vibration. That's how sound works, right?
Mm.
So you have sound waves traveling through the air or through the air. They hit our eardrums, and then our brains turn that sound vibration into meaning, right? So there's a physical vibration, but there's other kind of vibration we're talking about. That's what is that, right? Like it's not just sound vibrations. That's part of the experience, but there are other kinds of vibrations happening at that concert experience.
I have a playlist. I was looking for it this morning that I call my feel good playlist. I only have about 10 songs on it. So I love music. I play music and I love a very wide range of music. But on this playlist of about 10 songs, they're songs that when I listen to them, I just feel like if I really want, want to be uplifted,
Right.
these songs really do it. But I do have a sense that the music, the notes, whatever, is radiating something that lifts me up because I can listen to another piece of music that's equally as beautiful or whatever, but it's not on my feel good playlist because it's not changing it's not
Sure.
changing my emotional state.
Yeah. Well, I think of musical genres as each one having its own vibe, right? So
Yeah.
hip hop, heavy metal, classic rock, country western, R&B, jazz, right? Each one has its own kind of vibe. And then in terms of individual songs, though, that's also like an individual relationship. So in terms of my life history, my memory, things I've experienced, all these kinds of things, I will psychologically attach to a certain song or a certain band, which then will also change the vibe itself.
Mm.
Right. So when we think about human experience, it's a multi faceted experience, right? You have emotions, the psyche, you have vibes, you have nonverbal communication, you have language, etc. Right. But again, for my own interests, this thing that we call the vibe has been understudied by academics and intellectuals for forever, and so I'm here to try to steer us towards that.
So going down that road of study, what degree of research have you done on this?
Mhm.
And specifically, how can you research this in a
Yeah.
scientific way, which is
All right. So in academia, so you have the hard sciences, and then you have kind of what I do. In my field, you have the humanities and you have the social sciences. I am not a social scientist, right? I work on the side of humanities, and most of my work around the vibe is more theoretical and philosophical, right?
okay.
So you have this experience, and the question becomes, how do we understand this experience, and then how do we draft up a certain kind of model for understanding that experience? Now, having said that, I'm currently working on a book, tentatively entitled Vibe Talk: How and Why People Talk About the Vibe. So if any publishers out there, feel free to reach out to me.
Yeah.
I'm looking for a publisher, right? Anyway, so I'm basically chronicling how people talk about vibes and vibrations and energies, things like that. And what I've learned over the past, I don't know, year or so working on this is that um, it's not just in America, it's not just North America, it's not just in Europe, but most countries and most people around the world have some word for vibes, right? And it's not just contemporary in terms of the year 2025, but it goes back, decades, centuries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And so it's interesting, though, to figure out most people do have some experience of this thing we call the vibe. They may use different words, they may have different paradigms, but we're saying similar kinds of things, right? And I think that's enlightening, though, because it's not just a throwaway term, it's not just a pop phrase, right? Um, it may be a term we use on a daily basis, not thinking much about it, but there's more there if you scratch the surface, right? And so I guess one of the things I'm trying to do with my work is to help people articulate their experience of vibes and help them articulate their ideas and thoughts about vibes, right? And I say that because, like I said earlier, this. Let's say I live to be 100 years old, which I doubt that will happen. Let's say I live to be 100 years old. That only scratches the surface in terms of studying what we're talking about here, right? It's an ongoing historical project, and so I'm simply offering up my skill set and my knowledge, and again, inviting people to think about this for themselves.
I suppose when we look at philosophies, religion, spirituality, all of these sort of areas, they are worth studying and researching, and they're important to study and research, but we can't measure them. They're not two and two equals four. which doesn't any less mean that they're a really
Right.
important part uh,
Mhm.
um, of our life experience. I think I obviously haven't studied it, but it's almost obvious to me that, and I don't know why, but it just seems obvious to me that, of course, this is experienced throughout the world. Because I've been in multiple different countries. I've spoken with, obviously know people of lots of different nationalities, and yeah, it's such a natural part of how we communicate.
Mhm.
So then you would assume that it's global,
Mhm.
um, and I'm going to say also it's always been there. What I'm wondering, often when we look back into the past, we feel that people had a deeper connection to themselves, with nature, with spirituality, etc., and that we have drifted from that in the modern world. Do you think that's the case with vibes?
It's a really good question, and I don't have a ready-made answer for you. So I appreciate the question. It makes me
Mm.
think about these things, right? And I'm hesitant to deposit too much because I don't want to overstate the case. Like contemporary humanities have fallen from grace or anything like that.
Yeah,
But if I sit back and I think about modern day society, we are often distracted by all kinds of things: our phones, TV, radio, whatever, podcasts, whatever the case may
yeah.
be, right? Um, and so, if we are constantly distracted and if we do live in a certain kind of modern day civilization that rewards the ego as opposed to other forms of human experience, then one might argue that we are less attuned to the vibe now than we were generations ago. So,
Mm.
as a basic example of that, so as much as I love city life and I love city life, urban environments, etc., I also equally love the outdoors and nature. Right? And when I go camping for a weekend, or if I go hiking, for instance, you take on a different mindset. I mean, spending 15, even 20 minutes in nature, your psychological clutter starts to lessen a little bit, right? You can actually hear yourself think. You get in touch with your inner self, and that's a different experience. And I will argue that's also a different vibe. Like I'm more aware of different things than when I'm running around New York City, around Philadelphia, right? And that's not to denigrate urban life or modern day society. I appreciate everything we have, but I do agree that modern day society can distract us from this thing we call the vibe.
Yeah, interestingly, I live in the countryside, so there's a forest behind me. I'm looking over a small village, and from my kitchen, I look out across the ocean.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
yeah, so I'm here 20 years, but deliberately chose to live in a place like this. Now, I'm not that far from Dublin City. I'm about 40 minutes, so I'm not that far from Dublin City. But I love living here. I can't imagine myself wanting to live anywhere else. But I also love I have a son living in London. I love going to London. I
Mhm.
love New York. I mean, it is a crazy city.
Yeah.
And I've just been to Phoenix. And so I love experiencing cities. So I love going and spending, 4 or 5 days in New York or London or wherever, Paris. In fact, my wife and myself have often thought about going and living to really experience it. Go 6 months in London, 6 months in
Oh,
Paris,
yeah.
just to really experience it. So I love cities. I love going to cities, but I also always want to withdraw
Mhm.
from them. It's like, I'm going to call it energy and vibe, and maybe it's interesting. What's the difference? But so there's a quiet
Mhm.
vibe from living where I live, which is nice. And so then maybe you want to balance that with the buzz of New York
Yep.
City. But when I get on a plane after 4 or 5 days over there and come home, it's like
Yeah.
so. It makes sense that it's not just the business of activity, that I'm physically experiencing something as well when I'm close to nature and when I'm close to skyscrapers.
Yeah. 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 As you were saying that towards the end, it made me think about the practice of meditation.
Yeah,
Right. And so, I mean, obviously, that's been going on for thousands and thousands
yeah.
of years, right? There are long traditions of this. And I guess about 10 years ago, I started meditating on a regular basis. Short story, my father passed away. I was emotionally a mess, etc. Had to do something, so I started meditating. And I quickly realized, wow, like I actually enjoy this. If you can learn to discipline yourself, even for a few minutes a day, right? You get quiet, you clear your mind, you get in touch with yourself, prepare yourself for the day. And similar kind of experience. Like there's a reason why we meditate, and there's also a reason why human beings respond the way they do when they're out in nature. Right. So again, using this phrase of clearing your mind of the psychological clutter, then it makes you more aware of other kinds of experiences, one of which might be energies and vibes.
Mhm. I've I said to you before we started, I said I want you to speak about your passion, and the one of my passions is meditation. I've been meditating for 40 years. I
Wow.
was very fortunate to be introduced to it by my father when I was in my late teens, and I've had a daily practice. I've been to India. I've studied it under so many teachers. So it's really, really it's an important. And I start every day with meditation. But one of the things I have noticed over the years, it's almost always now, but I've noticed is that I experience in meditation energy moving through my body. Now, it's a strange thing to talk about because I don't attach any belief system to
Right.
that. I'm not telling you what that is. I'm
Right.
just saying I don't know what this is, but I've always experienced this energy going through my body. The second thing is that I can target that energy sometimes. So when I'm meditating and the energy begins to move in my body, it's almost like soaking into a warm bath. It has that healing, and therefore I remember sitting on a long distance flight many many years ago and having really stiff shoulders, and thinking, 8 hours in the plane. And so I started to meditate, and in the meditation, I brought all my attention to my
Hmm.
shoulders. By the time the meditation was finished, they had eased considerably. So I suppose, again, without any belief attached to it, over the years I have become very aware that there is an energy flowing in my body. So I now notice when it's flowing beautifully, it feels really really good. But I also notice when the energy is off, and it impacts my behavior. So um, I'm very conscious that if I'm going into a room with other people or any sort of a situation, or if I have to make a decision, I want to be in I'm going to say good vibe. I want to be in that positive energy because I'm going to say it radiates, and I'm not saying that because of this conversation. That's what's come to mind. I feel it radiates. I feel it impacts on me. So it impacts in the room. I suppose predominantly it impacts on me, and that will impact in the room. It's a completely different sensation, and I say I don't attach any belief to it other than it's just what I experience. So it kind of makes sense to me then that if that's the experience in my body, if it changes
Hmm.
all the
Yep.
time and different events change it, it makes sense that that radiates to other people. It accept it makes sense that people could pick up on that
Hmm.
somehow, whether that's physically, intuitively, I don't know, but it makes sense that people. Are you suggesting that we feel it physically? Is that kind of what you're suggesting?
Yes, 100%. Yes, yeah.
Of
It's a I mean, I'm not saying it's just a physical phenomenon,
course.
but we experience it through our physical bodies. So
Yeah.
yes, right. Um, and then I mean, you said a lot of things there that I hope I can remember what I wanted to respond to. So first, yes, think of our bodies as being in dialogue with each other all the time.
Mhm.
Right. So going back to the ACDC concert, I think that's a good example where there's a dialogue between the band and the audience members. All right. And that's got like the give and take, the back and forth between the band and the crowd. But there's also a dialogue between everyone in the crowd, and there's also a dialogue between all the band members, right? So you have like these kind of micro vibes that are happening that form a bigger vibe, and those bigger vibes then interact with other bigger vibes. So it's kind of like this grand orchestra of all these vibes happening all at once, right? And then you are this one person in the midst of that grand orchestra. But then additionally, implied in what you were saying with your meditation. So meditation takes practice, and I'm sure you know this. I'm sure
Mm.
you would say that, right? It takes
Yep.
practice,
Big time.
right? And that's also true for the vibe, right? Where you may experience a vibe once in a while at a concert, on a first date, at work, whatever it is, but it's happening all the time. And if you spend time practicing it, you can develop your skill set in terms of feeling certain kinds of vibes at certain kinds of times, using your vibe to your advantage. So, as a mode of communication, as a form of persuasion. So, for example, think of being a public speaker on a stage, right? And how do you learn to use your charisma? How do you learn to use your vibe as a way to engage the audience? So, some speakers can literally light up a room, they can hold the entire stadium by themselves. Other people have no stage presence whatsoever.
Mm.
Right? Nonetheless, though, you can learn to use that to your advantage, which takes practice, though, right? So make the vibe a habit, not just a once in a while experience.
This is something I often say to people about intuition, because I believe intuition can be really, really a valuable tool for us. But I feel that you, like any skill, you have to acknowledge it and practice it.
Yeah,
So we, and the more like if I go to the gym, it's almost like a muscle that it's innate within us, and the more we practice it, the better we become at it.
right, right.
So what you're saying is so what I'm picking up from this is the vibe is something similar. We all know we have it because, as you say, for the next week, notice two things: how often you're using your language, but notice how you walk in the room and you feel about vibe. And if you lean into that and pay attention to it, then you build that muscle. There's lots of things there I'd like to dig into. Just to go back a little bit, you said use the word dialogue.
Mhm.
I really liked that word because that's the idea that we're in dialogue. I like that idea, and it comes back to what I was saying about preparing my own state. Because if I'm in dialogue, if I walk into a room, and that could be with friends, in business,
Mhm.
if I am, if impact on my own state, if I'm conscious that there is a dialogue, I think that's for a practical step for people to do, to go. You walk into a room, you're in dialogue, so am I then setting the intention of my dialogue with my internal feeling and being receptive to someone else's dialogue?
Mhm. Yes, right. I mean, if you choose to do so, the answer is yes, right? Um,
When you say if you choose to do so,
there's
uh,
making a conscious choice to
I
be aware.
understand that. But after your 30 years of study, is that what you encourage? Do you think now this is a really valuable skill we have, and we should it is helpful to choose to do so?
Yes, 100%. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Now, with myself, it's kind of ironic where there's a reason why I'm the vibe guy, right? Like this is
Okay.
like I've
What's the
always
reason?
right, I've always been attuned to the vibe, even when I was a kid, just not really realizing it, right? And
Mhm.
so for me, I do it without thinking about it. Like it's
Yeah.
just second nature. I don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. But then in doing these podcasts and talking to people and whatnot, one of the big questions is always like, well, how do I attune to the vibe? I'm like, you just do. Like it's hard to explain because it's so
Yeah.
second nature for myself,
But
right?
what does that mean to you, to attune to the
Yeah.
vibe?
So, for instance, I could sit in a room full of people and I'm kind of sort of aware of what's happening all around me all the time,
Yeah.
right? And a big part of that awareness is the vibe or the energy or the unspoken dialogue. And
Mm.
so again, I would invite your listeners to practice this over the next week. So go out somewhere, just go somewhere. Could be at the park, at the mall, whatever it is. And sit back though and kind of just allow yourself to blend in to the environment, right? And then as you do that, soften your perception and soften your ego and try to feel yourself into that environment. Anyone that walks by, anyone that's across the street, anyone you see that's driving by in the car, and just kind of attune your attention to these multiple dialogues that are happening all at once, and see what this experience is like, and experiment with that, play with that, right, and try to develop your ability to tap into those vibe dialogues.
I really like that as an idea, to be tuning into other people's vibe consciously. Has that anything to do with aura? Is the aura, or
Yeah, no, yeah. The answer is yes, right? It depends on which tradition we're talking about,
yeah,
which paradigm we're talking about, but aura and vibe overlap. I'm not sure if they're exactly the same
mm,
thing, but they overlap and they're part of the same conversation.
yeah. I imagine your vibe impacts your aura,
Mhm.
if you have one. Um, Many years ago, I was on holidays with my wife and another couple in Cuba, and we were out late one night having dinner, and we were about 15 minutes from our hotel. I don't know if you've been to Cuba, but it's obviously very run down at this stage. And so we're walking. We decided it was a lovely evening. It was about midnight, lovely evening, and we said we'll walk back to the hotel. Now, if you'd seen the area we were in, with kind of almost like old buildings that were once beautiful but were now ruins, and these buildings packed with families and people sitting in the street. You were walking by and you could see a room and a family and lots of people out in the streets. Um, the funny thing is, had we been in that environment in New York City, I would not have left the restaurant. I
Oh,
would
okay.
I would have called a cab. I would not have
Right.
stepped outside until I was getting into a cab. There's no way I would have walked down because but we were walking down these streets that looked like they were a lot of poor people live there, etc. Um, and visually, you're kind of going, "This is not a safe place." But the energy or a vibe, whatever you want to call it, but we all had this feeling of comfort in the place. We just felt like this. Okay, there's poor people living here, but
Right.
there's such a positive energy. We walked home and we felt completely safe walking home. Um, that makes sense to me that there's a vibe in that, like
Hmm.
you said, in that community.
Sure.
And the four of us picked up that vibe and we're really comfortable to. And if you want to see it, you're going, I wouldn't walk there. But
Right.
when you were there, you go, I felt completely comfortable.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that kind of experience, I would argue, happens all the time, whether we're aware of it or not. And so again, I'm encouraging listeners to become more aware of it.
Mm.
Just to piggyback off of that example, I have a funny example of that. So there's a liquor store by my house that I go to once in a while. And for some reason, the owner there, I don't know his name, but we don't vibe together. I don't know what it is. I feel like he doesn't like me or something. I don't know why. But that last time I went a few weeks, I'm like, I'm done going there. Like I don't know what it is, but why am I giving this guy my business?
Because
And he's
he's
always
seen you and he's thinking, here's this crazy vibe guy. I've seen him on podcasts.
so, but it's like it's a micro example of what we're talking about,
Yeah.
right? And so that's one person at one store, but it's happening all the time.
Mm.
Right? And again, if you make it a practice, make it a habit, you can increase your ability to experience this kind of vibe and energy.
So on the other side of that, something else you said was persuasion. Now I and there's two roads I'd like to go down this. I I understand. I think I understand how I can walk into a room, and because I've controlled my own state, I can understand how I can radiate some sort of a positive vibe.
Mhm.
How does someone stand on a stage in an arena? And, music is slightly different, but you talked about speakers who own the room. And how does someone stand in front of hundreds or thousands of people and influence that vibe and be persuasive? Like, can you give me that secret? I'd love to have that
Uh,
talent.
I don't know if it's a secret. I'm not sure if I have a
Yeah,
secret.
yeah.
But if I think through the scenario, um, you have to turn yourself over to the experience. If you resist it, right, then you'll be nervous, you'll be anxious, and then
And that will be your vibe then, I suppose.
right, you're allowing the collective vibe to run your vibe.
Yeah.
But as a speaker, though, the audience wants to hear you. That's
Mm,
why they're listening to you, right?
mm,
And so the question is, how do you sink into that and then allow yourself to um, direct that energy in the room? So think of a maestro and an orchestra.
mm,
You have to be the maestro on stage that on the one hand you're letting the collective vibe in, you're experiencing that. At the same time though, you're tapping into it and you're directing that vibe in a certain kind of way, right? So do you want to raise them up, do you want to lower them, make them laugh, make them cry, make them angry, make them excited? But you have that ability. Now it's not just a vibe, it's also based on your nonverbal communication, your linguistic communication, there's the words you use, etc. It's a package deal.
mm.
Vibe, though, is kind of the subtle force in the room that you have the ability to direct if you so choose.
And that sounds like something you would have to practice as well, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, just public speaking in general. I mean, coming from a background in communication studies, most people have a deep fear of public speaking. I mean, it's
Yeah.
one of the biggest fears in life, right? But I always liken it to athletes before a game. Every athlete's nervous before a game, right? And if you watch them before the game, though, they're actually trying to get themselves more anxious and more excited because they know they can use that energy to their advantage, right? So before you speak in public, recognize you're naturally nervous. We all get nervous, but learn to use that to your advantage. Learn to use it as a form of communication.
When we look at the practical examples of this podcast is focused towards entrepreneurs, and I think entrepreneurs certainly. I spoke about this idea of tuning in before I would go into my office. Um, if someone owns a business, a lot of small business owners, and they know in their business there is not a good vibe, what can they begin to do to start and we all want a positive vibe in our business because again I'm going to say, I mean, it's obvious, again, it's this subliminal knowledge we have that our businesses are a better, more effective place if there's a positive
Sure.
vibe. So someone's listening to this, they're driving in the car, whatever, they're going, I like this. What can they do now? Monday morning they go into their office and they want to begin to shift the vibe. What type of actions can they practically take to do that?
Well, the first thing I think of, at least two parts of this, right? So if you're the boss, for instance, or the manager, whatever word you want to use, um, what vibe do you give off on a daily basis? Because a lot of times we take our clues from the person in power, person the authority figure,
Mm,
whether it's a parent, a teacher, in this case, a boss, right? So that's like, what can you do personally to craft a better vibe on a daily basis? But then also evaluate, and it's going to sound strange to some people, but evaluate the vibe of each one of your employees. Because even just one employee, one worker there with a bad vibe can ruin the vibe for everybody else. I know this for a fact. Like
mm,
I'm old enough to been in different environments, and one bad person, one bad vibe can ruin everyone else,
yeah.
right? And so if you see that, if you recognize, all right, there's one person, so it's ruining it for everyone else, right? Well, now how do you talk to this person? How do you try to encourage this person to be more positive, or at least not to be so negative, right? Or maybe, I mean, they have to be let go, and you have to replace the person with someone else. I mean, it could be that extreme. I mean, I've encountered plenty of people in my life where their vibe is so negative on a regular basis that it's pathological and it affects other people, right? And then in everyday discourse, a lot of times nowadays we call them energy vampires, but that's just
Yeah.
one example. But so I guess going back to your question, evaluate yourself, your own vibe, but also evaluate the vibe of each person that's in the workplace, and then see if you can adjust that to one degree or another.
Are we naturally drawn to a positive vibe?
I'm in the moment. I'm going to argue yes, right, but I want to qualify that in certain kind of ways. So going back to what you said earlier about your own practice of meditation, how you feel the energy move through your body, etc. I think that's kind of our natural state.
Mm,
And then when we have negative experiences, when we experience trauma, certain episodic moments in our lives, then that interferes with that natural state, right? So I would argue that the natural state is a state of calmness, being in tune, being in touch, etc. And then, though, due to a variety of life experiences, that gets thrown off course, and then the person, though, adopts a certain kind of um, foundation to themselves that's always negative,
mm,
right? But then we find ourselves being attracted to people who are not negative. So, for example, you're at a concert, at a sporting event, whatever, walking down the street, and I'm assuming we all had the experience where we just meet someone that is just genuinely happy, like to their
yeah,
core. That's infectious.
it is.
My experience is always like, man, like I want to be like that person.
Yeah.
Why am I want
Let's
to be like
spend
that
time
person?
with them, yeah.
Right, right. Um, Another way of putting that is that I think most people are attracted to people who are authentic, authentically themselves, right? And that itself is a certain kind of vibe,
Mm,
right? Where when I encounter someone who is genuine, who's authentic, it makes me or allows me to let down my guard, makes me feel more comfortable, right? And I kind of pick up on their authenticity, and I want to emulate that in return. Right? So it's slightly off your question, but I think the question of like being positive, or being happy, or being genuine, authentic, I think they're all very similar in the
mm.
conversation.
In business, we use the term culture a whole lot.
Okay.
And one of the things that was really important to me many years ago was to radically change the culture in my business. Um, and it's exactly what you said. Ultimately, it came down to realizing that I wanted a better culture in the business. You could call that a better vibe because it's the same thing. The culture
Right.
is what you experience when you walk into the place. Is it a positive vibe or a negative vibe? If you have a bad culture, it's a negative vibe. But then, from a business point of view, that per culture impacts everything else. If you have a positive culture, it positively impacts everything else. What I learned and what I realized is exactly what you're saying, that if I had 20 people working for me, that you had 18 people who largely wanted to go with a positive vibe, and you two or three disruptors. And those disruptors brought the energy, the vibe, the culture of the whole business
Hmm.
way down. And I know I spent years trying to fix that, trying to change that. And eventually I realized, well, some people just can't change. It's not my responsibility to change them. All I can do is set the tone in here and
Right.
remove those people from the organization. And that's a hard thing to do. But I once I realized that and start picking those people out, well, I found that very quickly once you remove those bad eggs,
Hmm.
the vibe changed, the culture changed enormously. And so that had such a positive impact on our business that we removed all those people who wanted a negative culture. Now you get a really, really positive culture and it transforms the business.
Hmm.
And now as we recruit, the first thing we look for is a cultural fit. Cultural fit. Are you okay? And maybe that is a vibe. I don't know. But first thing we go is this person going to come in and support our culture? Yes. Box ticked.
Yeah.
Now obviously we're looking for skills, etc., etc. But if you get the skills and it's not a cultural fit, it just doesn't work. Um, I think that that decision making. I think that is very. I don't know. Within a business, I think that's very practical, and I think it's a very close to vibe. Would you agree?
Yeah, yes, I totally agree. So again, there's a lot more to culture than just a
Of
vibe,
course,
right? So,
absolutely, yeah.
yeah. So I'm thinking about like walking into a building and literally the construction of the inside of the building, like what's on the walls, what's
Mm.
on the television, how are the cubicles set up, how the desk, like all of that matters,
Yes,
right?
of course.
Um, and then in terms of the people there, right? Like what time do you have lunch? Do you guys chat and stuff? Like there's there's a culture in terms of that. But I would say the totality of that culture, right, evokes a certain kind of vibe
Mm.
and evokes a certain kind of energy,
Yeah,
right? Yeah. Like you were saying, um, some people will and some people will not fit into that culture and that vibe, and that's in some ways that's fine. Like we're all different
of
people,
course, yeah.
right? But if you're running a business and trying to create a positive culture in that business, attending to vibes and doing vibe checks and all that kind of stuff is important. It's part of the evaluation process, part of facilitating a certain kind of culture that will benefit your business, or likewise facilitating and evoking a certain kind of vibe that will benefit your business.
Yeah, as we come to the end of the call, I'm thinking to myself, I started off warning that some of the listeners might think we're heading into a woo-woo conversation. And I suppose to some degree you can see why people think that because you can't put vibe in a box and you can't go, we measured the vibe. But the more we talk about it, for me, two things become evident. One is that everyone knows what vibe is. I
Hmm.
mean, everyone
Right.
knows what vibe is. You know, everyone speaks about it, everyone believes about it, every single person, and everyone feels it. And I'm hoping that at the end of this conversation, that people will that we've brought some awareness to it because I think I think that's been I think that's been the central part of the conversation that if you bring your attention to it, if you bring your attention to it, it can become a real asset in your life. Um, any final words of wisdom before we thank you and part company?
I'll just repeat what I said earlier. I invite your listeners to do two things. One, pay attention to how often they use the word vibe or hear someone else using the word vibe or some kind of variation thereof. But then, two, I also invite your listeners to practice their experience of the vibe, right? So try to pay attention, be aware, right? And then try to envision your body radiating out into the world, right? And envision your body being in dialogue with other bodies all the time. And then from there, experiment, practice, play with it, and see where you go with it.
Well, I'm certainly going to practice that myself. Where can people, if people want to learn more about this, where can they find you? Where can they learn more about this?
Yeah, sure. So I have a website, which is 20minutevibe.com. Again, 20minutevibe.com. And then on there, you can find my link to my YouTube page, Instagram, and Facebook. Feel free to contact me if you have questions and so on.
And I will stick that in the show notes. Um, Jason, it's been a really, really interesting conversation. I've learned a lot from it. I've taken a lot away from it, and I 100%. As soon as I hang up this, I'll become much more conscious of my vibe. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.